بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه والصلواته والسلامه تعالى على نبيه الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Imam Mark here from Middle Ground in Upland, California. And it's my pleasure again to participate with Lamppost, with the Lamppost Education Initiative. It's a real honor to have me come back on again. And looks like, today, this time, talking about, something that's on everybody's minds. We've seen, the reports, tragically, of the young sister who was murdered. And it's all left us feeling a certain kind of way, feeling insecure, angry, vulnerable. And I felt that it was important, even though we're in the last 10 days of Ramadan and we're all trying to maximize that time, but couldn't ignore, just couldn't ignore this incident. And so I want to preface, before we get into the meat and the bones of this today, I feel it's important for me to preface, because I had made a few comments earlier that seemed to upset a few people because they felt that what I was doing was being political, or I was lashing out, that I was somehow exclusively lashing out at the non-black / immigrant Muslim community. And that was because there have been some reports about how the attack went down and that people ran away and left the young girl to her insane demise. And that included reports of young men running away. And I made a comment that I stand by, but I want people to understand what I said. So I had said that, look, we have got to address this culture that we have in our community of raising men without masculinity and manhood. And even a close friend of mine was a little taken aback, right? Because I said, matter of fact, I said, I'm not going to play it soft with you. Our community, especially those from abroad, have and are raised and are raising spineless men. And this was taken that I was exclusively focusing on so-called immigrant Muslims to the exclusion of non-immigrant Muslims. So one, right, I had also made a post. I don't think it had gotten quite the level of attention, but I had made an equally critical comment about the Black American community, in which I said, I'm also not going to take it easy on my own people. I have also witnessed far too many young Black Muslim youth being indifferent towards women, or I should really say far too many, young Black Muslim men, right, being indifferent towards women and the elderly. We must address, we as Black folks, right, we must address the, quote, I don't give a ... culture we come from and propagate. So by no means was my comment to isolate the immigrant community. But if we don't take things personally, then we won't take things seriously. Now, to that effect, I do want to address an issue that I do see, not just in this incident, in the insane incident in Virginia, but I do want to address the immigrant, non-immigrant tension that we have in our community. And, over the last 24 hours, I've received, a flurry of, texts and people contacting me. And one thing that I do feel that we need to do in the Black American community is not use these moments as a sort of gotcha moment. And that many of us, and here's the very complex issue about this, is that sometimes I'm criticized by friends of mine who are coming from an immigrant background, and even, just other so-called immigrant Muslims that don't know me. They feel like, sometimes, man, it seems like you have like a gripe with, immigrants, or you make these, kind of like blunt, overreaching, obtuse comments. And I said, here's the thing. One reality is many non-black Muslims, many non-black, non-immigrant Muslims, particularly African-American Muslims, we have had really bad experiences for years in the Muslim community, meaning in the immigrant-dominated Muslim community. Some of those experiences are, without a doubt, valid. Some of them may not be. What we have to be careful, though, is not using this as a gotcha moment that I've just, here I am as a, African-American Muslim, and I'm just waiting for my Pakistani, my Egyptian, my whatever, brother or sister to do something wrong, and then use that to like just, laying in the cut, and now I'm going to attack you. And, increasingly we've also seen that, there has been, intermarriages between the black and non-black Muslim community. So sometimes this is also, can be a difficult thing. So all of this is to say, I'm not letting anybody off the hook. I think that the incident, not only in Virginia, but the incident in Portland, and then there was another incident, and I forget the city, but the sister, Rahma Warsam, the Somali sister that was attacking and had her teeth knocked out and whatnot, right? That there's a broader issue of what are we doing for security in our community? Part of that does involve men being men. And that, talking with a very good friend of mine last night, who I won't name unless he chooses to name himself, right? Who's a white American convert. And he was saying that, it might not be the most comfortable thing to hear, but one of the particular problems, right? One of the particular problems in the immigrant community has been raising of soft boys. And part of that is because, the immigrant experience, it is different than the non-immigrant experience here in America. Coming from somewhere, seeking security, seeking comfort, seeking wealth, right? And none of these things is, blameworthy in and of themselves. I think that's very important to remember. But if taken to an extreme, right, then we are left with a generation of young Muslim men in particular who like to just sit around playing video games. I'm still astonished at the number of young Muslim men who, 30, 35, almost 40, not married, that seem to almost have a loathing for responsibility, because part of manhood is being responsible. So this is not a gotcha moment, right? But at the same time, it's not possible to look critically at ourselves and our community, which is very diverse, and boil everything down to a kind of simple syrup solution, right? And that the challenges that we see in the immigrant community and the challenges we see in the Black American Muslim community, right? We have different histories, and we need to recognize that history is a very powerful force in creating psychologies and behaviors, right? And therefore we must address them separately, but in the same, kind of egalitarian spirit. So, I say all this that we need to really, we need to address this issue of particularly the women in our community and our children, because this was a young woman, but 17 years old is still a child. We need to address the insecurity in our community. And I know the police are trying to say that this is just an issue of, road rage, and that it didn't have anything to do with her religion or race. I think a lot of us are not willing to accept that conclusion. And more importantly, again, we can just take the other couple of examples, right? The two sisters in Portland, the other sister that I mentioned. There is something that we need to fix in our community. So I think on one part, we need to think about masculinity. And I think that all of this liberalism and androgyny that we have going on in the community, it's creating, I think it leads to the behavior of indifference, right? Because in traditional cultures, men are seen as protectors of their families. And we do see examples, right? We do see exceptions. So we saw the case of Ibn Ali Miller, who intervened in the young boys that were fighting, right? That's an incredible example. What we need to do is make that more of the norm and less of the exception that, when it happens, we almost treat it like it's a pageant, right? And we're celebratory of it versus, no, that's just what men do. And there seems to be a reluctance or even a hostility sometimes to our community where we as men want to address specifically our role as men as protectors and sustainers of our community. And I think that desperately needs to change. Because at the end of the day, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that a 17-year-old child of ours can be beaten to death with a baseball bat. It's mind-blowing. So how do we fix this? As I said, in the Black American community, when I lived in Philadelphia, that's what I'm saying, I'm not letting anybody off the hook. When I lived in Philadelphia, where there was a predominant Black American expression of Islam, I also saw extreme examples of indifference towards the treatment of Muslim women. So, when it's a white perpetrator, right, in the case in Portland, right, when it's a white perpetrator, then in some ways that fits the rubric and the bill better for us, because then it's like, yes, all of this rage that we have built up about, what's going on in the Muslim world and colonialism and all these things pent up, right? Now that fits the stereotype that we would prefer for our victimizer, our oppressor to have. And as I was saying to my friend last night, there is a tendency within the Muslim community, and I'm trying to read the exact quote right here. I said, many of us would like to try and succeed in making whiteness the reason and the paper tiger why Chuck, which is my nickname, right, for white supremacy, stomped the sugar honey iced tea out of Muslims in their respective countries, and also for African Americans in slavery, right? So because of that experience of colonialism, because of that experience of slavery, right, many of us will turn whiteness into a sort of paper tiger. Not that there aren't real issues. Obviously, white supremacy is a major issue, right? I'm not changing my attitude on that, right? But when we do that, then what happens is we will then never look at why we are so weak versus Chuck is so strong. We will never look at as to why we are so weak, as to how we could get stomped in the first place. And even more importantly, we will never examine the decadence in our own cultures and societies as to why they fail, whether that's Muslim societies abroad or the Muslim society or culture here in America. And, as we saw in this case, the perpetrator of Nabra was apparently a Latino, either Mexican-American or Latino perpetrator. And it seemed like a little bit of air had kind of gone out of the room when we found out that the perp wasn't white. Now, I will say that I've experienced this, that there seems to be an increase or uptick in white aspirational attitudes from certain non-whites, particularly groups like Latinos, who then co-opt, adopt, or amplify anti-black and now also anti-Muslim sentiments in exchange for their assimilation into whiteness. So I've seen, the GOP Republicans very heavily courting Latinos, and it's, a friend of mine, he lives next to a police officer who's Mexican-American that has the thin blue line flag and is kind of belligerent, who my friend is African-American. And we've seen this kind of change in attitude, right? Like sort of the Rubios of the Latino community. So there's no doubt that could possibly be in there, right? But I think we also need to be very conscious of making straw tigers. And that we need to, as I had said yesterday, for me, the issue in Portland, the issue in Kansas, right, where they were targeting, the white supremacists were targeting Somali immigrants there, it's a Muslim issue. And I mean that it's a Muslim issue because we are the victims of this. We can try to say, oh, this is a white issue or a white supremacy issue. That's part of it. But we need to acknowledge our weakness as a community first. And what are we going to do to address it? I believe that we need to return to a spirit of men being just that, being men, which isn't about a hyper-masculinity. Matter of fact, that's part of the problem that I saw in Philadelphia, particularly in the black community, was there was like a hyper-masculinity, but it was devoid of any fada'il, any merits, right? There was no, to evoke I hate to evoke the word, but, for lack of a better word, right, chivalry or, valor or, just men being strong without being overbearing and oppressive, right? I think we need to return to that versus men being reared and raised to be creatures of comfort. And I think that is a lot of what we're going on. And again, I stand by my words in my observation. And I've had several other, immigrant Muslims say, yes, it's true. It is a problem that we, in our searching of a new home, of a new land, we have focused on creature comforts to the point that now it is a detriment for us. And again, also in the black community, we need to change our attitudes of indifference. So this isn't about demonizing one of the other. But I really feel that if we are going to no longer be victims, right? And this is where, again, some people were like, well, brother, that wasn't that kind of an unfair comment. When I had said, look, we've got to move beyond, we have got to move beyond fundraising for people who want our demise. So the other part that I feel is also fundamental in all this is that Muslims need to wake up and realize there are people here that do want to do us harm. Now, I know people say, brother, that's going to make our children, grow up and grow up in a climate of fear and this and that. And look, you have to face reality. That doesn't mean every single person is out there, but that doesn't also mean, none of us goes, I hope not, none of us goes to sleep at night with our front doors unlocked, right? Many of us don't know our neighbors. We're on good terms with them. And if our houses were to be broken into, probably wouldn't be them. But we also lock our doors. We, as the Prophet ﷺ said, we tie our camel. So we have to also realize that we are living in an age of intimidation. We also need to look at who are the victims here, right? That the victims have predominantly been women and women of color. I believe this sister in Virginia, they said it was a Nubian background. I know at least one of the sisters in Portland was Somali, as well as another sister who was beaten up. And then when the white supremacists in Kansas, right, who were they attacking or targeting? Somali. So there is this confluence of attacking women and attacking people of color. And these are vulnerable segments of our population. And I really ask myself and us, what are we doing to ensure the safety and the security of the most vulnerable of our community? We know we live in a political climate right now where Trump and his comrades want to target particularly those groups. They want to target Somalis. They want to target Islam, and of course in America, unfortunately, the iconic representation of Islam in America is the Muslim woman in hijab. And we need to really figure out how Muslim men can step up to the plate. Another aspect, I know this probably sounds a little bit tangential. I usually try to make this, I'm just really upset. When I talked to Dr. Ali Abdullah Ali yesterday, I was barely coherent on the phone. I was just extremely upset about what happened in Virginia. And I think the other part is we need to get back to a discussion of what does it mean for us to go out alone? There's all of this attacking of tradition. There's all of this reforming of tradition. But there's a reason for mahram. There's a reason for male escort. Now, does this mean to where you can never go out? No. But we need to have another conversation where in a climate of intimidation and hate, where people are clearly prepared to take us out of this life, does it make sense that we should let the vulnerable in our community, the elderly, women, children, youth, right? Does it make sense, people of color, does it make sense for them to just, go out and do whatever you want? This will undoubtedly really irk some people that, brother, well, now you're blaming the victim. This is not about blaming the victim. But this is about what are we doing to be responsible and to take appropriate measures so that we do not have to have another 17-year-old child beaten to death. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, again, I don't believe it's possible that if we do not take things personally, then we won't take them seriously. And if we don't take things seriously, then there won't be any change. That applies to us individually, our religion, our spirituality, our relationship with God, and it also applies on a communal level. without taking things personally, right? So people, well, I don't appreciate that comment about immigrant Muslims. It's a fact. Just as those observations about that issue in the Black American community, that's a fact. We cannot, in the spirit of some sort of misplaced egalitarianism, water everything down, where it's like, well, yeah, well, the immigrant community has their issues and the Black community has their issues, so they're kind of like, they cancel each other out. -1 plus +1 equals 0, right? This will not work. So I really hope that there's some way we can move beyond, paper tigers, that we can address the issue at hand, which is, white supremacy is undoubtedly an issue. But in my opinion, the bigger issue is us, right? And I don't use this word often, but the Islamic perspective is always, Rabbi inni dhalamtu nafsi, or dhalamu anfusahum, right? I've wronged myself. I am the bigger part of the problem, right? There's always going to be external factors, and we have to deal with those external factors. But we have to look really deep within ourselves, individually and as a community, and we have to take that personally. We have to take it personally. That's the only way that I can see any way that our community has any hope of making a change for the better. So please, have these conversations with your family. Go to your whatever, your masajid, whatever your community. Have a town hall meeting. Reach out and make sure that people know that they are looked after. I think right now especially, we need to make sure that those vulnerable elements in our community, those vulnerable sections in our community, know that we care about them. So if this is what it is, if they're targeting, Black Muslim women, if they're targeting Somalis, right, or if next week they're targeting Indonesians or whatever, we need to reach out to those sections of those communities and let them know we stand with you, we care about you, we love you, we want you to be safe. What can we do to assist you in that? We have to do that. We have to look after our elderly. We have to look after our youth. We have to look after those segments of our community that are vulnerable. And this isn't about living in a climate of fear, right? But we are living in a climate of intimidation, and I really worry about what kind of message we're sending to young Muslim children and youth, that if they don't feel the elders of their community, and I'm sorry, if they do not feel the men of their community are willing to raise up and protect them, and I'm not being overly dramatic, but even if need be, have to give their life for them, then those children their attitude towards Islam is going to be fundamentally compromised. So we really have to do some serious soul searching of how we can make these changes. So I extol myself and you. Take this personally. Take it personally so that we can take it seriously, and that so we can, inshallah, make a change that will be a benefit for us in this life and for the next. Again, thank you to Lamppost Education Initiative for having me on. Maybe we should put one of those little disclaimers at the bottom, right? The words of this guest do not necessarily reflect the views of Lamppost, I hope people will take this to heart and understand that sometimes we have to be critical, and we have to make critique, and there's a difference between being critical and critiquing, right? This is not a gotcha moment, at least for me. I'm clarifying my point. This is not a gotcha moment for Imam Mark to lash out at some immigrants, because I've already got some beef with immigrants that's already been piled up, and I've been just keeping this on the side, and now this is my opportunity. This is not what I'm doing. And I hope that people will understand that. I mean, I'm the imam of a predominantly immigrant community, right? So it's very hard for me to have that kind of animosity and then try to serve that community. So I hope, inshallah, we can take this to heart and pray for our sister. May Allah grant her Jannah and give her the status of Shahida, of a martyr in the next life. May Allah have mercy upon her family to grieve but still maintain a good opinion of their Lord. And may Allah, who is Muqallibul Qulub, may Allah turn our hearts to people of action, and that action according to His book and His beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa jazakumullahu khairan. Imam Mark signing off on Middle Ground. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.